Alright folks, for our video today, I'm going to use the information from the Supreme Court of the great state of Tennessee. On January 11, 2005, the defendant in this case shot his wife to death at her office in the TDOT facility in Jackson, Tennessee. Defendant also shot and killed Mr. Hopper, who was in the office of Miss Jordan at the time of the shooting. After leaving the office, the defendant shot and killed Mr. Gordon. He was a motorist that had followed the defendant to the TDOT facility after the defendant ran Mr. Gordon off the road. Now, when Mr. Gordon accosted the defendant about the incident, the defendant removed a high-powered rifle from his truck and shot Mr. Gordon 13 times. The defendant then returned to the TDOT office and riddled his wife's body with shots from the automatic rifle. During the incident, the defendant shot and wounded two other TDOT employees, James Goff and Larry Taylor. Now, he would be convicted of 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder in those 2 shootings. So now the 3 homicide victims are Donna Jordan, Jerry Hopper, who was a Tennessee Division of Forestry employee who happened to be at the facility having his vehicle worked on, and David Gordon, a motorist. Now, the state's theory that they took to trial was that the defendant decided to murder his wife because he believed she was having an affair with a co-worker, and she had told the defendant she wanted a divorce. Now, Johnny Emerson was the employee that was having a relationship with the defendant's wife. Now, at one point, this Mr. Emerson actually called and spoke to the defendant on the phone. He confessed his sin, and that was the end of the phone call. So now, January 11, 2005, Miss Jordan went to work there at the TDOT office in the garage. Now, the office she worked in was upstairs, so it was referred to as the crow's nest. Now, Mr. Evans, he was up in the office with Miss Jordan till about 10 minutes after 11 when he left to go pick up some parts. Now, another TDOT employee, Ricky Simpson, and James Goff were in the office with Miss Jordan. Now, between 9:30 and 10 o'clock that morning, Miss Jordan handed her phone to Mr. Stockton, and she asked him to answer the phone call. Mr. Stockton did, and he recognized the caller's voice as that of the defendant. Now, the defendant asked to speak to his wife. Mr. Stockton told him she was in the restroom, and she didn't want to talk to him. And Mr. Stockton, he then left to go pick up some parts, and he wasn't present during the shooting. Now, a fellow named Sonny Grime, he testified he was riding in a Ford pickup truck with Paul Forsyth. They were driving westbound on Lower Brownsville Road on January 11th. Now, these 2 fellows, they worked for Rouse Trailers, and they were on their way to pick up some starter fluid for a backhoe. And there was a green car traveling in front of them. Now, as they approached England Lane, Graham saw the defendant, who was driving a red pickup truck, failed to stop at the stop sign there at Lower Brownsville Road and England Lane and struck the green vehicle, knocking it off the road. Now, Mr. Graham, he wrote down the license plate number of the defendant's vehicle. He said the defendant continued traveling, that would be back westbound on Lower Brownsville Road, and then head into the TDOT area. So now Graham and Forsyth and the driver of the green car, they all followed the defendant to the garage. Now, when they pulled up, Mr. Graham saw people running everywhere, which to me might have been a hint that maybe we should be leaving. Now, Mr. Forsyth, he gave the driver of the green car the license plate number of the red pickup truck. The defendant came out of the garage and told the driver of the green car, "You better leave." The driver, who was David Gordon, said, "I'm not going anywhere." The defendant said, "Yes, you are too." Now, at that time, the defendant reached in his truck, pulled out a rifle. Mr. Gordon, he threw up his hands in the air, and he told the defendant, "Please don't shoot, wait a minute." However, the defendant started shooting and shot Mr. Gordon. Now, Forsyth and Grimm, they fled the scene. Now, a fellow named Randy Joe Perry, a TDOT employee, he was standing in the garage when the defendant walked in the garage and pushed him out of the way as he was heading up the steps to go to the crow's nest where Miss Jordan worked. David Picard, another TDOT employee who was standing near Mr. Perry, said, "Who is that son of a bitch?" The defendant, who had his right hand in his coat pocket, turned around and gave Perry and Pickard a hard look before going upstairs to the crow's nest. Now, Mr. Perry then heard 3 or 4 gunshots, and looking through the window in the crow's nest, saw the defendant pointing a gun at Jerry Hopper, who was sitting in a chair. Perry heard another gunshot and saw Hopper slump over. Hearing more gunshots, Perry ran and got behind his truck. Shortly thereafter, the defendant calmly walked outside to his vehicle. Now, Mr. Perry, he noticed a man get out of another vehicle and walk towards the defendant. That's going to be Mr. Gordon. He said he saw the defendant reach inside his truck and retrieve a rifle. The man who had been walking towards the defendant stopped and raised his hands. A few seconds later, the defendant fired several shots at the man. Perry described the shots as coming from a fully automatic and so quick that he could not count them. The man the defendant shot went out of sight behind the vehicle. The defendant walked over to the fallen man and shot him again. Then he turned and just calmly walked back towards his truck, put the rifle in the truck, just eased in there and drove off as easy as you please towards the front gate. Now, James Goff, he said he was in the crow's nest with Miss Jordan, Larry Taylor, and Jerry Hopper when the defendant came in. The defendant raised his shirt and pulled out what appeared to be a 9mm pistol. Miss Jordan had her back to the door, and the defendant called out her name. Miss Jordan turned around, and the defendant started shooting. Mr. Goff stated that the defendant was about 6 feet away. The defendant shot Miss Jordan in the chest and fired additional shots, including what appeared to be a shot to the forehead. The defendant then shot Hopper. Now, Taylor, he dove under a desk, and the defendant shot Goff in the leg, the right side of the neck, the arm, and the stomach. Although he did not see Taylor being shot, Goff heard 2 more shots and heard Taylor grunt. As the defendant was leaving the crow's nest, Goff heard him mutter, "I love you, Renee." Now, Larry Taylor testified he was ending a telephone call inside the crow's nest when the defendant entered the room, stood there for a moment or so, pulled his coat back, brandished a weapon, and took a police stance. The defendant then called Miss Jordan by name, and when she turned to face him, shot her. 1 gunshot struck her in the stomach area. She fell back in a chair, and the defendant fired 2 additional shots, with the second shot striking her torso a little higher up, and the third shot striking her in the head. Miss Jordan fell to the floor, and Taylor could tell that she was dead. Now, Taylor dove under a desk for protection, heard more gunshots, and saw Goff fall. He then heard more gunshots and felt pain in his legs. Now, Taylor heard the door close, and Goff asked him was he all right before leaving the room. Taylor then got up and saw Hopper on the floor on his knees with his face in his hands, saw Miss Jordan on the floor with her face in a pool of blood. He called 911 and was trying to assist Hopper when he heard the door open and saw the defendant with a rifle-type gun. Taylor looked at the defendant square in the eye, stood back up, holding both hands in front of him. He asked the defendant if he could leave, and after a brief pause, the defendant said, "Yeah, you can go out now." After Taylor got downstairs, he heard gunshots in rapid succession and hurriedly went out the door. He saw Goff, who was kind of delirious and holding a towel to his neck, and told another employee, Alvin Harris, to drive Goff to the hospital in the parts truck. Taylor then got in his car and drove himself to the hospital where he was treated for the gunshot wounds to his legs. Now, Freddie Ellison, reserve sheriff's deputy and a mechanic at TDOT, he testified he returned to the garage from his lunch break around 11:30, and people were running out of the garage. He then observed the defendant, who he had known for approximately 20 years, walk out of the roll-up doors of the garage. Ellison asked the defendant what he was doing. The defendant raised his right hand, and Ellison saw 2 semi-automatic handguns. The defendant said, "Go on, back off, just go on, back off." The defendant had his hand on one of the guns. Ellison retreated to the back of the building where he observed David Gordon pull up in a green car. He heard Gordon announced to the guy in the red pickup truck has run over me, and Ellison advised Gordon to back off because the defendant had a gun. Gordon refused, stating that he had the police on the way. Ellison then heard automatic gunfire, and then he called the Madison County Sheriff's Department for assistance. He and Willie Martin left TDOT, went out on 223. That's the highway out in front of the building. He saw the defendant leave in his red pickup truck, driving normally, and headed towards Jackson. Shortly thereafter, Ellison observed an unmarked police unit and advised dispatch to instruct the unit to follow the defendant. Ellison then returned to the TDOT garage and saw David Gordon on the ground. Gordon had been shot multiple times. Inside the crow's nest, Ellison discovered blood all over the floor. Saw Miss Jordan lying on the floor with multiple gunshot wounds. He described Miss Jordan as being shot all to pieces, including being shot in the forehead. Jerry Hopper had been shot several times in the chest. Now, Jackson Police Sergeant Mike Thomas, he said he was on patrol in an unmarked cruiser on Van Drive when he received a call about the shooting at the TDOT garage. En route to the scene, Sergeant Thomas was advised that the suspect had a machine gun. Before reaching the TDOT garage, he observed a red Mazda pickup truck matching the description of the suspect vehicle and began pursuit of the truck. Now, the truck ran a stop sign. Shortly thereafter, a marked patrol unit driven by Sergeant Sane passed the truck on England Lane. Now, Sergeant Sane, he turned his cruiser around and joined the pursuit. Another unmarked unit, driven by Captain Pretty, joined the pursuit. Then the defendant's vehicle forced Captain Pretty's vehicle off the road. Now, Officer Maxwell placed his patrol cruiser in a position to do a partial roadblock. Suspect's vehicle hit Officer Maxwell's car, and Sergeant Thomas pulled in behind to block it from leaving. Suspect, identified as the defendant, was taken into custody. Search of the defendant's person revealed a loaded .45 caliber pistol and a loaded 9mm pistol. Inside the defendant's truck, the officers discovered a rifle and a shotgun. Now, Dr. Stacy Turner, she performed the autopsy on Miss Jordan. She found that Miss Jordan had been shot 11 times, resulting in wounds to the head, the torso, and right leg. Dr. Turner found the injuries to the scalp, the skull, the bones of the face, the brain, multiple ribs, the right lung, the diaphragm, the liver, the right kidney, the stomach, small intestine, the urinary bladder, and the uterus. Dr. Turner recovered multiple bullets, bullet jackets, bullet cores, and white plastic disc fragments during the autopsy. Gunshot wound to Miss Jordan's forehead was fired from a handgun within a foot of the body. Now, Dr. Amy McMaster, she did the autopsy on Jerry Hopper. Hopper had suffered multiple gunshot wounds and had multiple abrasions and lacerations resulting from these wounds. Dr. McMaster discovered a gunshot wound to the right wrist and 2 gunshot wounds to the right side of the abdomen. She recovered 2 projectiles from Mr. Hopper's body. Projectiles were large caliber deformed hollow point bullets, which were consistent with those fired from a 9mm weapon. Now, Dr. McMaster, she did the autopsy on David Gordon. Gordon had multiple gunshot wounds and injuries associated with the wounds. Although no exact number of wounds could be determined, Gordon had been shot at least 13 times. He had wounds to his right thigh, right forearm, right lower abdomen, right and left sides of the torso, buttocks, and left hip. The projectiles recovered from these wounds were consistent with a 7.62mm round. Agent Kathy Ferguson of the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, she was a violent crimes investigator with the Jackson Police Department at the time of this event. She said she responded to the scene at the garage, and she was directed to the crow's nest, where she found Miss Jordan lying in a large pool of blood that contained brain matter. Realizing she could not help Miss Jordan, Ferguson assisted with the CPR on Jerry Hopper. Ferguson subsequently recovered evidence found inside the crow's nest and outside the garage, including 9mm and 7.62 shell casings, bullet fragments, and a note on which Grimm had written defendant's license tag number. She said that 15 7.62 shell casings were recovered from the exterior crime scene and 4 from inside the crow's nest. 9 9mm shell casings and 1 live 9mm round were found inside the crow's nest. The jury found the defendant of the first-degree premeditated murder of Renee Jordan, first-degree premeditated murder of Jerry Hopper, and the first-degree felony murder of Jerry Hopper, the first-degree premeditated murder of David Gordon, and the first-degree felony murder of David Gordon. Now, he was also convicted of first-degree attempted murder of James Goff, aggravated assault of James Goff, attempted first-degree murder of Larry Taylor, aggravated assault of Larry Taylor, and leaving the scene of an accident. Now, he is, as far as I know, still on death row, great state of Tennessee.